The only future is one in which both Israeli and Palestinian people are safe and free and can live with dignity.
It's important to be part of a union because you have to have a voice.
Welcome to Union Talk. I'm Randi Weingarten.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Union Talk. This is our 49th episode, and this is a pretty special one. Not that I don't think every one of them are special, but this is with a group of Jews and Palestinians. They're all citizens of Israel, and they are part of a group called Standing Together. Standing Together is a grassroots movement in Israel proper that mobilizes Jews and Palestinians in the pursuit of peace, equality, social and climate justice. And it's basically younger activist Israelis, but Israelis from all walks of life and all ages coming together under this purple banner who are saying that both peoples in Israel, Jews and Arab, deserve a life of equality and justice for all. And that all Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel are able or should be able to have safety and security, equality and self-determination. Now, that's where they stood before October 7th. And after October 7th, their job has both gotten much harder and much more important. Because what they're about is they are about what should happen long-term in terms of this terrible, tragic catastrophe that we've witnessed since October 7th. Those of us in America who witnessed this have seen the heartbreak in Israel in the aftermath of the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th, and then the heartbreak in Gaza with thousands of children and families displaced and killed, with a huge humanitarian crisis playing out in front of our eyes. And which is why we, the AFT, and so many others have said we need to end the war now. We need a ceasefire. We need to bring the hostages home. We need the humanitarian relief. But we also need to make sure that there is a day after. And what Standing Together does is they have this radical prospect that says freedom of one doesn't require the suppression of others. And so they want to end the occupation. They want to make sure that Gaza is self-governed by Palestinians. They want to make sure the West Bank is self-governed by Palestinians. They want Israel and Israelis to be safe. They want Palestinians to have equal say in Israeli society. Sounds very much like our civil rights movements here in America. So we, the AFT, brought them over from Israel to actually talk about what they're about and to start having these really hard conversations in the United States. Instead of one side being here saying Israel, 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 and the other side saying Palestine, Palestine's Palestine. It is a sense of we need to hold the trauma that each has and the aspirations for a better life that each have, and reject the binary and understand that the Jews are not going anywhere, the Palestinians are not going anywhere. What is the pathway to a different life, to a life of equality and freedom and self-determination? That's why we asked them to come over to the United States. It's in keeping with what the AFT does and has done for years, but particularly since 2016, our convention, where we said we are for a two-state solution. we are for both Jews and Palestinians to have the freedom, the equality, the self-determination, the shared society to which they both deserve. And we will do this work through engagement, like we've done with Hand in Hand, like we've done now with Standing Together, like we've done with the Parent Circle and Combatants for Peace. And so instead of it simply being those of us who have had the honor and privilege to meet Standing Together, either in Israel or in the Palestinian territories or here in the U.S., we wanted our members and students to have the opportunity to meet them as well. You'll also hear in this session from Daily Beast writer and public speaker Wajahat Ali, as well as Amy Spitalnick, who is the CEO for the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, and Eric Ward, who led that discussion as well. How do we bring people together? How do we have difficult conversations about a war that has torn people apart? So I hope you enjoy the conversation between Sally Abed and Alon-Lee Green, both leaders of Standing Together, as well as Wajahat Ali and Amy Spitalnick and Eric Ward and myself in this very special recording of our live conversation. Thank you.
We were just at the White House, and the meeting actually went longer than we thought. And here's Alon-Lee Green. And the meeting went longer than we thought. So what ended up happening was, and I'm sure Eric described this, that we really wanted to have a dialogue of all six of us, because one of the things we are trying to do, and you notice I'm not using my notes anymore, one of the things we are trying to do is really here in the U.S., open up the aperture, start having a conversation again on all issues Israel and Palestine related. And regardless of where people are on these issues, if we don't actually have a conversation, I'm sure my dear friend Eric has said this, if we don't actually have a conversation, what's going to end up happening is the extremists, particularly the right-wing extremists, whether it's Netanyahu, excuse me for my views, or Trump, will win. They will. And so there's lots of positions. I know a lot of people in this room. There's lots of positions in this room about what should happen in Israel and Gaza. What should happen about a ceasefire, a bilateral ceasefire, what should happen in terms of Hamas. Hopefully there's no disagreement that there is a catastrophic humanitarian crisis going on that must be resolved, famine as we speak. And hopefully there's no disagreement in this room about what happens in terms of the hostages. But there's lots of other disagreements. But if we don't start having conversations, particularly conversations with Palestinian Americans and Jewish Americans, and have the movement that we have had for so long in terms of civil rights, that movement will crack open. And so part of what we're trying to do is start having those conversations. And if we don't start it here, where else are we going to start it? But then, separate and apart, but of course linked, because all of this, we're the AFT. How many high schools are we involved in? How many colleges are we involved in? How many workplaces are we involved in where nobody can have a conversation about any of these issues anymore? So if we don't, as the AFT, how can we ask anybody else to do it? Which is part of the reason why I and Sharon Kleinbaum, who's my wife, who's here somewhere, helped me do this. We double teamed them. We begged Standing Together. They were here in November, but frankly, we begged them to come back to actually be our guests in a secular way with secular audiences. Yes, I know who I am. I know that I am proudly Jewish, but I run a secular organization, the AFT. Notice, I don't know if our new branding is here yet, but, we are an organization, membership, educators, healthcare, public services. So we call ourselves the AFT now. But what has happened in Israel is that this group standing together has done, in my judgment, a prophetic thing. They are creating a new reality that they are trying to convince Israel's society about, 20% of whom are Palestinians. How is there, and I'm going to use some of the things that I've heard Sally, who is both of these folks, Sally Abed and Alon-Lee Green, are my teachers. How do you create a new reality that says for Jewish security, you actually need Palestinian autonomy? You actually need a shared society. You actually need, in my language, not theirs, a second state, an Israeli state, a Palestinian state. And what do you do in Israel itself? How do you have a different reality, a different choice than a choice that's simply years and years and years of violence, with October 7th just being one of the most horrible examples of it? And these folks start as community organizers. Alon-Lee Green started the union of waiters from a coffee shop that he worked at in Israel, in Tel Aviv. Get that right? Without my notes. And this young lady sitting to my left, a community organizer, a Palestinian in Haifa that just won on a joint list as a city councilor in Haifa. Fighting, does this sound familiar? For real, sustainable family wages. They'd probably say it in Arabic and Hebrew, not in English. Fighting for housing, fighting for climate change, fighting on these issues, economic issues, peace issues, freedom issues, opportunity issues, a shared society, self-determination. So we wanted to try to have this conversation together to model. But you guys had the conversation before already. And so I want to just turn it over to the two of you. They are exhausted, but they have been amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'm a little bit upset I missed the conversation now. Hi. Yeah, I mean, the appetizers usually also can be the best part. I'm Sally Abed. Thank you, everyone, for coming here. I'm 32. I live in Haifa. I'm originally from Ma'alia, which is a Palestinian town near the Lebanese borders, closer to Lebanon in the north. You know, standing together really, before we really start talking about it, we do need to acknowledge where we're coming from. We need to acknowledge our reality, and who listened to me earlier today, listened to it. But it's important for us coming as a Palestinian, you know, who is coming from an Israeli-based organization, from the Israeli society, and talking about the Israeli society as part of it, as Palestinian, is almost mission impossible at these days. So it's important for me to acknowledge that. And also, we are really witnessing one of the most catastrophic human losses and crises in decades, if not of this century. We're talking about Gaza with over 30,000 people dead, nearly 14,000 kids. 14,000 kids. We're talking about almost 20,000 kids who are amputated or orphaned. Almost 15,000 amputated, malnourished right now. We're talking about displacement, about complete destruction. And we're talking about the West Bank. No one talks about the West Bank. It's an Israel-Gaza war, right? The West Bank, where there are now people also being collectively punished as dependent on economically on Israel. Tens of thousands of families who can't enter, who don't have any income right now, who are also facing income insecurity, who are facing food insecurity, who are getting attacked by the day, every day, by settlers in the West Bank, backed by the occupation army, by the Israeli army. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids and youth and men being abducted from their streets by secret services in the West Bank, detained politically without any right for trial. We're talking about an Israeli society that we're coming from that is deeply, deeply traumatized, having endured a very, very heavy attack from Hamas on October 7th, and who had leadership that has completely failed to not only attend to the trauma, to grieve with the people, but actually capitalized on it, fed on it to promise destruction, eradication, erasure, revenge, killing. And that's all they did. They literally left us to fend for ourselves as a society. On the contrary, they actually are trying to attack our own society. They're trying to not only go against Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in the West Bank, but actually persecuting the 20% population within Israel. Arresting us, harassing us, expelling us from work and from universities. And they are really spreading tens of thousands of arms right now, who are right now in Israeli society being used against women, against Palestinians, against marginalized groups in our cities. And that's in Israeli society. And the reason why I say this is because we need to debunk the myth that Jewish safety is dependent on the oppression of Palestinians and military controlling Palestinians. We need to debunk the myth that the US, by giving so many guns and military aid unconditionally to a lunatic government of openly fascist ministers who have messianic fantasies of eradicating the Palestinians, the other people living on the land, and giving them complete support, a blank check policy that's somehow supporting us as people in Israel. Being pro-Israeli and pro-Israeli government is actually against the people in Israel. And if you are for the Jewish safety, you have to be for the Palestinian freedom and the other way around. There's no way around it. And we're here to really demand a ceasefire agreement to stop the destruction and killing and to return the hostages back home. And we're here to also ask for the end of the military control, end to the occupation, and for peace, for freedom and equality for both peoples on the land. And standing together really is based on these understandings, very, very simple understandings. What I said right now is quite simple, right? Like, it's not simple, it's very, very hard. But it's quite simple understanding, assumptions of our lives. We can agree on the facts that we have right now, that we have 7 million Jews, 7 million Palestinians, and we all deserve to exist equally, freely. We also deserve to prosper, not only not die and survive. I think that's a very simple assumption. And standing together understands, we are the largest Jewish Arab grassroots movement within Israel, Jewish Palestinian grassroots movement within Israel, trying to understand that we need to build the political will, intention within our society to end the occupation, to go into a process of bilateral agreement, of diplomatic relations, of understanding how can we build a leadership that can go into a room and imagine peace, a sustainable future for both peoples. And we do that because we assume two things. One, the Israeli society is the hegemonic society. We need to understand that. Okay? If we need to end this cycle of violence, it does need to come from the Israeli public. It does need to come from the Israeli state as the hegemonic, controlling, occupying force. And we need to acknowledge that. But we cannot do that by morally lecturing the Israeli people. We cannot do that by shouting the ugly, ugly truth of the decades of oppression of Palestinians. That's a truth that we should hold in. I hold it as a Palestinian, and I think all of us should hold it. But it's not a truth that we can lead with, that we can perform constantly without thinking, how can we convince the Israeli public out of self-interest, out of patriotic notion, out of Jewish safety, to actually resist the occupation from self-interest and shared interest. The second thing that we do is the fact that the Israeli society has both Palestinians and Jews. We are 20% of the population. The Palestinian citizens of Israel are 20% of the population. That's a critical mass. And this mass is currently being silenced and persecuted. It is also our mission not to only empower this national minority within Israel. We also understand that in order to do that, in order to build a co-leadership, to build this new majority, to build this new political current, this shift in paradigm, I also need to co-lead the Israeli public and not only my people. I'm not interested in Alon-Lee's partnership if he just wants to save me as a Jewish man. I'm not. It actually won't be possible for us to build an equal leadership. It won't. We won't be able to break the hegemony, to break the power differential if he just wants to save me. I want him to do it out of self-interest. And for me, as a Palestinian, my power is not only by asking solidarity. For solidarity, that's important. I do want to receive solidarity. But I also want to send my solidarity and apply and really promote my solidarity and understand and acknowledge the marginalized groups within my society, the injustices, the inequalities within our society, both Palestinian and Jewish. And that's how we connect both the struggles for social justice and equality to the struggle against the occupation and for peace, because it needs to be a people's interest, a people's politics that leads these political issues. And that's what Standing Together has been doing for many years, and especially now, since October 7th, we are really at that historic junction to not only connect between these struggles, but really found ourselves at a critical position to provide the alternative vision that the Israeli public is not being presented with. And how can a public choose something, follow something, elect something that doesn't exist? And right now, no one in Israel is presenting the Israeli public with that option. They're only being provided with the option of it's necessary to kill, to destruct, to misplace, to displace, to dispossess, to control, to incarcerate. It's necessary for our safety. And we know that's not true. And we need the social movement that can create the politics that can give that exciting new alternative. And this is the time to do it. Thank you.
I'm actually not sure what can I add. Part of the reasons we've made this difficult choice, and Randi actually had to beg, and Sharon, for us to agree to leave home again after a few months. We've been here in November after 5 months of war, is that we felt that it is very important for us to try and come here and try and tell this untold story of this amazing fact that is so unseen sometimes, that Israel has a society, that we are also a people, that we also have fears and traumas, hopes, conflicts with our government, and that it is the missing component, the missing part of the puzzle in terms of understanding how do we translate this energy of so many people in the world right now, understanding that this reality must end, that the war must end, that the occupation must end, that the killing and destruction in Gaza must end. How do we translate this shout, this demand, this exploding kind of bursting energy? How do we actually build a strategy to make it come true, to really create this reality? And what we feel is that this part, this component of the Israeli public is the key one to understand how to move forward from this reality. Because, like it or not, agree with it or don't agree with it, we are a society that suffered a great trauma on October 7th. For us, it has been the worst day of our lives. It was something that each of us experienced in a terrible way that we will remember to the rest of our lives. It was a life-changing event, a life-changing moment. And even 5 months and a bit more after, it is still traumatic. It is still an open wound. And for most Israelis, what we are doing right now in Gaza is an act of survival. For many Israelis, what the government is promising them, destruction, elimination, flattening Gaza, it is a promise of self-survival. It is a promise of the only way possible to actually make sure that this thing will not happen again. And Hamas actually says we will do it again, right? We heard these quotes of them. And with this soil, with this reality, it is very easy for the right wing, for the very crazy messianics, people that are in power, in our leadership, to kind of capitalize and to try and build these terrible trends of openly calling for killing children, killing innocent people. And I think that this is what Sally means when we say that we cannot come and morally lecture people. We can shout this truth, saying that killing innocent people, destroying 70% of all the homes and houses in Gaza, that's not going to bring us safety. We can shout at them that it's just fascism or it's racism and no, this war is terrible. But if we actually want to change this reality, we need to become an internal actor within our society and to not give up on the patriotic stand of our internal place in our society, of saying that and believing and really convincing other people that this is the self-interest of both Palestinian citizens of Israel and Jewish citizens of Israel, to not allow this reality to continue to happen, to end the occupation, to end this war, to achieve a ceasefire agreement, to end the killing and destruction in Gaza, and to bring back the hostages. For us, looking maybe from the outside on what happens in Israel, it's easy to forget that a pain of a mother in Israel that sends her child to Gaza is a true pain. It's a true pain when she looks at her phone, receiving a phone call from an unknown number, and maybe she's worried that that will be the most terrible call she gets in her life. Someone from outside can say, but this child of yours, he's the oppressor. He's the one that is responsible for all the things that is happening in Gaza. He's not the victim. You're not the victim. They are the victim. But we live a much more complicated reality where we understand that this reality is maybe not equal. It's extremely unequal. Palestinians are paying a much higher price for this reality. 30,000 people dead. Children in the amounts that are unfathomable of people that were killed. But still, also the Israeli society pays a price. And if someone from the outside will come and look at us and will say, all Israelis, all Jewish Israelis are somehow benefiting from the reality and all the Palestinians are the victims, that will be the wrong equation to understand this reality. And when we come to this missing piece, this very important or key component of understanding how to change this reality, there's no way to bypass the Israeli society, going through the both societies actually that are living on the ground. Because those that will say oppressors, so you need to just boycott them, just, put the international pressure on the Israeli government. By the way, we think it can be effective. We're not against it. But put this pressure on the Israeli government, and the occupation will end, Palestinians will be free, and that's it. No, we need to remind them that there is a society in Israel that is resilient. There's an army in Israel that is strong. There's a government that isn't going to resign. And if we will not be able to build the political will within our society to convince the Israelis that this is our own interest, not only out of act of solidarity to stand with the Palestinians, but our own interest to stop sending our children to standing checkpoints, to oppress people in Hebron, to go to Gaza and destroy, to jeopardize their lives, to come back with traumas, to lose the ability to have a normal economy, to prosper, to actually live a normal life. If we will not be able to create this story, to build a majority around this new story, then the occupation will continue. Then the right wing will be able to continue and prosper and to really work with this terrible trauma and fear that are real. So what we are trying to do is to put this option in the menu, because for so many years it wasn't. It just wasn't. It was one main option of, in order for us to survive, they need to be oppressed. We need to control them. And this is really the natural thing to choose, because you don't have another option. But if you have another option, if you create competition in reality, competition in politics, which is, politics is always about competition. It's always about polarizing the public in a good way. When I say I support the right of women to vote and to get elected, some people can say, no, I don't want it to happen. I want to polarize the public in a good way, to put the majority of people to choose the option of ending the occupation and the oppression and achieving peace. So that's the role of standing together. That's the mission we take upon ourselves, the responsibility we choose to take upon ourselves. And the reason we come here to the US is to gather support for this crucial mission, to also talk with our partners, to try and find ways to make the next year, the next years count. We hit a historic junction. People do understand that the status quo, the thought that we can maintain, this control over millions of people, that will just move from one war to the other, and in the middle will do, in between will do nothing, that exploded. It really exploded in our faces. And this historic junction has only two ways that we can move forward. One is not forward at all, is eternal war, is a path of mutual destruction, of grief and sorrow, and many times more than what we've seen in the last 5 months. And the other option is to turn to a direction of Israeli-Palestinian peace, which means a reality, not just as a slogan, Israeli-Palestinian peace, but a real reality where all the people that live on this land, 7 million Palestinians, 7 million Jewish people, that none of them is going anywhere, that all of these people will live an equal life, a free life, and an independent life. And this is the option we're trying to lead our people in the direction of. Thank you.
Before I open up, thank you, both of you. But before I open it up to the audience, I want to open it up to Waj and Amy to say comments or questions for them, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Well, Amy wants me to go first. First and foremost, thank you so much for what you're doing. As Amy echoed in our brilliant appetizer before you came, you missed out a lot. It was awesome. We understand. Heard. Yeah, no, we understand the attacks you receive from within your communities, the assumptions that people have, and how people shut you down before even listening to you. And we had the pleasure of listening to you before also. And I said, if people really listen to them, they brought their own truth. They didn't sugarcoat anything. But a question I have, and it's a question that's, I hope you're not offended by this, a question that someone brought up when they found out that I would join this panel. They're like, oh, that sounds great. But isn't that just kumbaya? Aren't they just, the rare unicorns? And it's wonderful that they're doing it. There's an occupation. So, it's wonderful. Congratulations. But standing together when the society is not there. And I hope you don't mind my framing of it. I'm just echoing the cynicism.
And usually Sally has stronger things to say after me. But, well, I can answer that in the last few weeks, we gathered food and aid from more than 1,000 Jewish and Palestinian citizens in Israel in 5 different cities and locations that we had a few days. People could bring in flour and baby products and different kinds of food. And we led convoys from those cities in Israel to the Gazan border to try and break the barrier, break the wall of ignorance, of not seeing the hunger, the starvation, the famine in our news, and to really try and come to the border and pass food and aid to Palestinians in Gaza, and also, by the way, to the hostages in Gaza, because if Palestinians are starving, I guess also the Israeli hostages are also starving because they're there in Gaza with the same reality. And that wasn't just kumbaya, let's talk. And we're not coming from this direction at all. We address the occupation. We are actively protesting against the occupation in Israel, in the West Bank with Palestinian partners. When we come, we get hit and brutalized by the police or the army a lot of times. And yes, we pay a price for that, but we will never, ever talk about the self-price that we're paying in the Israeli society, because this is not the issue. We don't want to present ourselves as a chaste, persecuted minority in Israel that are like just better than society. No, we insist on the hegemonic part of speaking in behalf of the majority in Israel, even though the majority is not organized with us yet. But we insist on this role in the Israeli society. And I know that a lot of people outside would want us to hear how we're like these heroes, putting ourselves outside of society, manage to, shout ugly truths in the face of people, using these hot words that people like to use, because it matters more than actually the actions that we're doing. But we insist to do differently. We really insist on looking at what needs to be done and doing the hard work of not writing an essay or posting something with the right words, but actually speaking with people, organizing people, building power. And that's more important for us to just, get the thumbs up. And, I hate when people come to me and they say, wow, you're such a hero. How are you standing in solidarity with Palestinians? No, I'm not a hero. I actually want to be part of my society and to be a normal part of this. I want this to be the mainstream. I don't want to be outside of my society.
I'll add very, very little things. I think, people here, it's very easy to criticize. I think I always see the people who are always cynical. Cynicism is such a privilege too, right? Like cynicism and there's an occupation. Yeah, there's an occupation. What are you doing about it? I think we really are. I think a lot of people here, it's important for them to hear us describe our reality in the ugliest way possible, giving the urgency. And I get it. I really get it. And out of helplessness, they try to escalate the terminology, right? Like, why are you not shouting more? Why are you not and I think I'm pretty blunt and descriptive, but I should be more, And why are you talking about the Israeli society? They're all rapists and occupiers and killers. And well, if I want to reject my society, which is rejecting me right now, by the way, they are, yeah? Most of the Israeli society right now is rejecting the fact that I'm Palestinian, okay? But I'm also able to talk to hundreds of thousands of people in Israel and moving the needle. And I have a decision. Do I want to relinquish my, just really refuse, boycott the Israeli society as a Palestinian in Israel, and in that way also giving up my immense privilege as a Palestinian to be part and be able to change things and lead Palestinians in Israel, but also Jewish people in Israel. I have these two options. I can go that way. It's just, in my opinion, an extremely privileged stance that I don't think I have a privilege to take, to relinquish that responsibility and that opportunity to impact. That's Palestinians in Israel. I think standing together, we're not a kumbaya, in a sense that, people say, oh, you're in the middle, you're like the middle ground. We're not the middle ground. We're completely new ground, okay? We are completely new ground that is, we hold the truth, we hold the history, we hold what's happening. The history is not very complicated. It's not. What's happening right now is not complicated. There are very, very clear things that need to stop. There are very clear things that happened that need to be acknowledged. And we need to go through a very, very strong process of healing and recognition and reconciliation as Palestinian people. It's not complicated. But we also need to understand where we are right now at this point and move forward, because we understand that we need to stop the killing and the incarceration and the oppression right now. And in my opinion, performing the ugly truth, that's kumbaya. That's kumbaya, and that's privileged.
I'm so glad you asked the kumbaya question, and I want to pick up on something both of you said, because, you know, I run an organization that does what we call community relations in the Jewish community, which is what some would argue is also, quote, kumbaya, building bridges, coalitions between communities. And particularly post-October 7th, we're being told we need to lean out of those relationships. We need to stop sitting down with others and building bridges. And in fact, this is the moment to lean into those relationships. Not because of kumbaya dialogue and dialogue for the sake of dialogue and let's all just sit together. And not even because my Jewish values tell me that I should be repairing the world and bringing justice to everything I do, although that is important. We should be doing it because it's in all of our self-interest, to the point you made, Sally. And what the research actually tells us, and I think this is where the parallels are ultimately between the experiences we're sort of each having, doing very similar but also very different work on two sides of the world, is that the way to engage the people we need to engage in the fight against anti-Semitism and other forms of hate here in the United States is to help them understand their own self-interest in doing so. We recently did a study that looked at 18 to 34-year-olds, and it said the message that resonated best in engaging them on anti-Semitism was hate begets hate, anti-Semitism leads to other forms of hate, and it threatens our democracy. And the same thing is true in breaking out of the false binaries and zero-sum narratives of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The only future is one in which both Israeli and Palestinian people are safe and free and can live with dignity. And that is true here, in which the only world and inclusive society that's possible for us is one in which both of our kids are safe and free and able to live as Muslims and Jews without fear of hate or violence. And so how we actually help people understand this is in their own self-interest is the only path forward. And I think the ways in which both of you articulate that and bring that message to each of your communities, but to also Israeli society writ large at a moment when it is so lost from the conversation, is crucial. So thank you for that.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Union Talk. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and tune in every other week for a new episode. Thank you, be safe, and be well.